I've discussed in a previous video how the way that words tend to be distinguished from other types of elements in any given language is the way that it can be moved and separated around any given clause. However, there are some languages which defy these types of definitions, which were used by linguists for a long time and indeed are still taught today. In this video, I'll show a few different examples of languages which use words in non-traditional ways. Even children know the differences between nouns, verbs, and adjectives, even if they can't explain them very well. However, linguists used to think that these were fundamental to all languages. And not only does this exaggerate the differences between the categories, but also it's not necessarily true for each language. In English, for instance, there is a high degree of interchangeability between nouns, verbs, and adjectives, because the categories are determined not by the meaning, but by the grammar. For instance, many words can be all three. I water a plant with water from my water bucket. Or indeed, if you want a real-life example, take the ad featured on a TV streaming service, "Come TV with us." With this in mind, you might think that this interchangeability still relies on the linguistic context of the word. And this is correct, with one exception. Straight Salish does not have its words defined by the linguistic context around them, which means that there is no necessary distinction between verbs, nouns, adjectives, and adverbs. With this, it might seem a little strange, but consider how, if in English you have the word to, it cannot be followed by an adjective or an adverb. You cannot have too happy or too happily without something to follow. In Straight Salish, this is not the case. There are none of these such linguistic limitations in terms of what can and can't be a noun in different places in the sentence. And indeed, this is especially true of verbs. To find out how, check out the link in the description. Sign languages have almost all the same features as spoken language, with the exception of sound. They have their own unique syntax, not related to other languages. They have regional accents, and with one exception, they have their own morphology and phonemes. However, al-sayyid Bedouin Sign Language, ABSL, used in a Bedouin community in Israel, does not have unique phonemes. This is a recently developed sign language which was used because there is a increasing deaf population in this one community. And so, rather than the normal systematic way in which sign languages develop, this was more rushed. There are no phonemes, that is to say, because there are no sounds in sign language, no smaller gestures which make up individual words. Instead, a gesture has to be completely unique in ABSL. This would be like the equivalent of having words in any spoken language, except not having smaller sounds to break them up. This might need a whole new way of thinking about creating languages. However, there is no other example in the world known to linguists of a language which does not have smaller units than a word. There is no compounding, no affixes, and no gestures which equate to what sounds do in spoken languages. English is not a language to surprise too many linguists at this point, partly because it's borrowed from so many different languages, and partly because so many linguists speak English that at this point it may seem like a normal or even standard. However, this is not necessarily going to be the case for people who don't think about it on a daily basis. For instance, compounds have been talked about at length in a previous video on word facts. However, there are other types of compounds which don't rely on the sum of their parts. For instance, butterfly is a compound in English from butter and fly, but it does not rely on the meaning of butter, although fly is in fairness, indicative of the fact that it is an insect. Furthermore, acronyms and initialisms function as their own words, irrespective of the parts that make them up. They have their own syntactic rules which fit just the same way as any other noun, verb, or adjective, or any other thing that it might happen to be, works. For instance, in the phrase I just LOL'd, or I just lulled, we see that there is inflectional morphology in the form of the past tense ed on LOL. This could also be any other sort of morphology, but either way, we must therefore consider this to be a word like anything else. Indeed, looking at the next example, I'm so OCD, we can also see that it doesn't necessarily matter what the initialism is supposed to spell out. And I just LOL'd, the ED is being added on to what stands for loud, not the verb laughed. And so we see that LOL becomes its own verb in the same way that OCD becomes an adjective, even though disorder, what the D stands for, is a noun. They become their own words, not just initialisms. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, give it a like, but also, please let me know if you like this new format for lists, and I can do more of those in the future. Otherwise, you can always check out the daily blog for more updates, and if you want to help support WordFacts and get even more linguistic content, you can always check out the Patreon for a WordFacts podcast, word theories, and more. Thanks a lot for watching. I'll see you next time.